Madhusoodanan in as brief a manner as possible. G. Madhusoodanan, a prominent writer in Malayalam, is the founder Director General of WISE, that is, World Institute of Sustainable Energy, and the pioneer of Ecocriticism in Malayalam. Beginning his career in the IAS, he rose to the rank of Principal Secretary to the Government of and worked with the Government of India in the Department of Economic Affairs and was a senior advisor with UNDP for over 4 years. He was invited to present a paper on Indian short story and ecofeminism in the first ever global conference on ecological literary criticism held at Colorado State University in 1995. This event led to the founding of the Association for the Study of Literature and Environment, ASLE. He took voluntary retirement from IAS in 2004 to establish the World Institute of Sustainable Energy, WISE, at Pune, and continues to be its founder Director General, an institution committed to the cause of promoting sustainable energy, energy conservation, and sustainable development. He pioneered ecological literary criticism in Malayalam and has published 9 pioneering books in Malayalam, out of which 5 are in the field of ecocriticism. His major books are Kathayum Paristhidiyum, Bhavakatvam 21ാം നൂറ്റാണ്ടിൽ, ഭാവനയുടെ ജലസ്ഥലികൾ, ഹരിത നിരൂപണം മലയാളത്തിൽ, The Collected Essays of G. Madhusoodanan, G. Pranamam, Enviyude Paristhidi Chindagal, Chindayude Navalogangal, and Nashtamaguna Nammude Swapnabhumi, out of which the last one is the first comprehensive environmental history of Kerala, published by the Kerala Sahitya Academy in 2017, and continues to be their bestseller. For his writings in Malayalam, he received 6 prestigious literary awards, including the Sahitya Academy Award in 2003. He is also a well-known author and speaker in the area of sustainable energy and sustainable development. He has conceived, edited, and published 4 books in English: Sustainable Agriculture for the 21st Century, The New Energy Economy, Wind Power Development in India, and A Solar Future for India. Besides, he has authored numerous articles in various national and regional publications on environment, sustainable energy, and sustainable development. He is an invited speaker to major renewable energy and environmental conferences in Kerala, India, and abroad. He has also worked in many Asia-Pacific countries for renewable energy policy development as a consultant to the United Nations. The body of his eco-critical work is now being translated into English. And today, G. Madhusoodanan sir will be giving you a lecture on climate fiction and eco-criticism, and he'll be joining you from Pune. Over to you, sir. Madhusoodanan sir. Thank you.
Problem. Concept of Anthropocene, which all of you are probably familiar. And then I would speak about climate science in as simple way as possible, because I know I'm addressing an audience of people from humanities. So climate science is a very serious subject, but I'll try and put it across in as simple way as possible. Then third, I would speak about climate fiction, a certain extent, how it emerged and what's the history and the way it is taking now. And fourth, I would speak about ecocriticism and climate fiction. Now, about Anthropocene, in fact, in 2016, when hello, am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right, okay. In 2016, when the Global Working Group on the Anthropocene made this proposal to declare our era as Anthropocene, I wrote about this in the Malayalam Weekly. The Malayalam Indian Express publishes a weekly called Malayalam. I don't know how many of you read Malayalam. Immediately after the working group came up with this proposal, I had written about a detailed essay on the subject in Malayalam, which has been collected in one of my books. So Anthropocene, I mean, before that, let me say we are now living in what is called Holocene for about last 12,000 years. Holocene started after the last ice age which was about 12,000 years ago. So now the proposal is to rename Holocene as Anthropocene. You must be knowing the roots of this word, anthropo, that's a Latin root. It basically means in Malayalam, we should say Manushya Yugam or something like that, Anthropocene. Why is this proposal made? Because humans have become a geological force capable of altering planetary situation in a very global way. This has happened in the last 100 years or so. Or you could say it goes back to 1784 when the steam engine was invented by James Watt. So since then, humanity has progressively acquired the capacity to alter our habitat, the planet, in a very big way. So they are now become a geological force which can alter our existence in very major ways. So it is technology, it is capital, it is our ambition, or what we call as sky is the limit. In fact, I like the title you put for your seminar, Effacing, what is it called? Effacing Culture of Extinction. In fact, I'm working on this whole concept of extinction now, actually. I'm writing, my next book is due for publication before June by the Shastra Sahitya Parishad in Kerala. I might write it in English also. So one of the chapters is on this potential for extinction, actually, what we are doing and moving towards extinction. So I really like the title of your seminar. So Anthropocene is yet to be formally approved by the International Commission on Stratigraphy, but the proposal is already there, and in literary circles, Anthropocene has become, and philosophical circles, of course, Anthropocene has become a major terminology now. Various ways we have altered the planet. The Earth's natural cycles. I don't want to go into the details, but there are many natural cycles in the Earth which are critical for our survival. The major one, of course, is carbon cycle, then the hydrological cycle, then the nitrogen cycle. There are many such cycles in the altered through our economic activities. Second is habitat destruction, which is all connected. These are all connected, even though I am putting them as separate issues. They're all connected. Habitat destruction in a major way. Sea level rise and marine pollution, it's not significant enough to gain our attention, but in the next 20, 30 years, it's going to be extremely significant. Biodiversity loss, which is again related to habitat loss. Pollution and the threat of nuclear extinction. And finally, climate change, which is our subject today. Most people have a very peripheral understanding of climate change. Maybe after 2018, there is a little more understanding because Kerala faced the floods. So now everybody talks about climate change. In fact, there is a tendency to attribute any natural change to climate change now, which is unscientific, of course. But we are increasingly witnessing evidence of serious climate change, manifestations of that in our daily lives. Kerala witnessed the problem in 2018 and again in 2019, not to that extent as in 2018. In fact, after 2018, I traveled very widely in Kerala to see the impact of the floods. I visited 5 districts, the hotspot areas, mostly starting from Cochin, Thrissur to Cochin towards the southern part of Kerala, central and southern part of Kerala. But having said that, Anthropocene is a contested nomenclature because Anthropocene concept, I know there are, in the working group, there are many Nobel Prize winning scientists, but politically, somewhere they have got it wrong. Because Anthropocene concept is a very apolitical concept. It, in a way, masks certain forces behind creating the situation we are currently in. So there has been a proposal by some Marxist thinkers like Elmar Altuwater, Jason Moore, saying that we should call it Capitalocene. Anthropocene, so it's a contested terminology. They have put across their own reasons why they would call it a capital ocean. I'll come to these aspects a little later. The latest I saw was the famous scientist James Lovelock, who proposed the Gaia theory, which many of you may be familiar with. He has come up with a terminology called Novocene. And his latest book is titled actually as Novocene. So there are contested terminologies about the fact, and or I would call it the forces of capital and the forces of technology have become geological forces capable of altering our life, our future, and probably if we don't remedy the situation soon enough, extinction hangs as a threat above our existence. Now, I'll briefly speak about climate change. As I said, it's a very serious subject. I've been working on it for many years. And in fact, for many years, I refused to speak about climate change because it's very dystopian. If you really go into what is happening in climate change, it's extremely dystopian. And to address the youngsters, the future generations, that kind of dystopian facts, scientific facts, is pretty puzzling. So I have actually refused to speak on climate change for many years. Institute of mine just to work on mitigating climate change, because the one major way of mitigating to create energy sources which are clean, which are green, which doesn't emit any greenhouse gases. So in fact, quitting IAS is a very difficult thing to do, but I did it in 2004 to establish this institute to work for the propagation of alternative energy as a climate mitigation source. So few talks I have delivered, like I think it was in 2017 when the Kerala Economists Association asked me to speak in Calicut University to deliver a talk on climate change. I did it, but I am still worried because I don't want to give the younger generation a perceptive, a kind of future which looks very gloomy. But that is a reality we now have to face. And now I've started writing and speaking openly about it. So briefly, it is like this. To put very simply, there was a time when Earth didn't have animals or human beings. There was only plants. After life evolved in Earth, there were only plants. And plants didn't need oxygen. So the Earth's atmosphere didn't have much oxygen concentration in the atmosphere. So plants, through their working, absorb carbon dioxide, and as we all know, they release oxygen. So over millions of years, the situation for emergence of animal life is created on Earth when Earth crossed about the atmosphere of the Earth crossed about 24% of oxygen concentration. So what has happened? The carbon dioxide, which is absorbed by the plants, it may be marine plankton, it may be huge trees like Digitalia, which existed those days. When they disappeared from Earth in geologic time, much of that carbon dioxide which is absorbed by them was buried underground. It may be planktons because we are mining now oil and gas from offshore areas from the sea. It is on land also, like you see in the Gulf region. Most of the oil is extracted from land, desert areas. Desert areas like Saudi Arabia, for example, maximum oil comes from Saudi Arabia. And another country, which is Venezuela, which has the maximum oil. So these fossil fuels, as we call them, three of them, and of course, the first fossil fuel which we started extracting after James Watt invented steam engine, we started extracting in a very big way. Coal. Second was oil, which was discovered around 1854 in the United States in Pennsylvania, in a region near Pennsylvania, in the Pennsylvania state. I've been to that place. So 1854 was the formal, discovery of oil. Simultaneously, it was discovered in Russia and all. But the big breaking was, the big happening in terms of oil was actually in the Persian Gulf region. Persian Gulf region was in Iran around 1910. But the major discoveries in the Persian Gulf started after 1935. The exploration started around 1930 with the American help, and real, drilling started after 1935, and the oil started flowing towards all countries in the world after the Second World War. So oil was the other second biggest fossil fuel. Third was, of course, what we call natural gas. So these three fossil fuels we have been burning for, let's say, more than last 100 years in a big way. Because I'm saying 100 years, 110 years, let us say, because the major burning of oil started after Henry Ford started manufacturing his Model T car in the United States. The first car was launched in 1908. So we could say it's about 112 years since we have started burning fossil fuels in a major way with the advent of the automobile. I also drive a car, so I'm not blaming anybody who uses cars. We have no choice. So what we are offered, we have to use them. So we all use cars or buses or even trains which run on diesel. So it's not a blame game at all. It's historical perspective which I'm trying to develop. So oil became a major source of pollution after 1908. In fact, Ronald Barthes, in his book Mythologies, there is an essay on, he was reviewing a Renault car which was launched in France. And he called the automobiles Gothic cathedrals of modernity. So such cathedrals, Gothic cathedrals, you can say is not just automobiles. Aircraft can also be included. The large ships moving around our seas, they can also be called Gothic cathedrals because you're talking of, ships which traverse our seas, ships which have a curb weight of 4.5 lakhs tons. That's the kind of Gothic cathedrals we have developed using fossil fuels. So it's historical, it has happened, it's nobody is to be blamed, but there were alternatives which were suppressed, which were not allowed to develop in time. So what happened was burning of these fossil fuels emitted the carbon dioxide which is absorbed by vegetation and sent underground in geologic time. We have excavated all that in the last 150 years. We have put the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere after the advent of industrial revolution. It's not just carbon dioxide, we call them, which, in fact, even water vapor is a greenhouse gas. A large presence of water vapor in the atmosphere is dangerous for climate. So the greenhouse gas emissions in the last, let's say, more than 100 years, 112 years, have increased multiple so much that 2018 figures, it's like 52 billion tons of pollution we have emitted, all greenhouse gases. Out of that, CO2 itself is around 30 to 33 billion tons. Other gases contribute the rest. So 52 billion tons, I don't know, billion, you're very sure, many of you are sure, it's 5,200 crore tons we have emitted in 2018, and there is no respite. This continues in 2019. This year, it may be less because of the corona pandemic, because the economic activity has come to a halt all over the world. It has slowed down. It's not come to a halt, but it has slowed down. So this year, when the emission figures come, it may be less, but that's going to be a transient phenomenon, because by next June, July, September, we should be crossing the problems of this pandemic because vaccines are going to be available. So the emission trend is going to continue. But the problem really is that, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide was there in the atmosphere. We need carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because that is what keeps our planet warm. If we don't have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the planet will be a cold place. It won't be suitable for living. But the concentration in the atmosphere is probably much less than even 1%. It's about 0.4% or so. In other terms, we define it as pre-industrial carbon dioxide concentration as 280 parts per million. That was the pre-industrial level. And recently it has crossed 411 parts per million and racing towards a doubling in the next decade or so. So that is the situation. So we have too much of a good thing is bad. So we have put too much carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, and that is preventing, the radiation being emitted back into the stratosphere, going out of our atmosphere. Because the sun's radiation which comes into the earth, it is radiated back. The bad part of it is radiated back from various surfaces like our water bodies, the sea. The maximum radiation is reflected back by our cryosphere. I don't know, you're familiar with the term cryosphere. Cryosphere is the part of the earth which is covered by ice or snow. I mean, mostly a lot of it is sitting in the South Pole and North Pole, and also in the high mountain areas like Himalayas. In fact, the second biggest concentration of snow and ice is in the Himalayas after the poles. Poles, when you speak of the poles, we are speaking of lakhs of cubic kilometers of ice and snow sitting there. In fact, the Antarctic has the maximum ice and snow sitting, which is more than, I think it's more than 12 lakh cubic kilometers sitting in Antarctic. The northern pole, which is the Arctic, has little less, maybe half of the size of Antarctic. But all around the world, we have the cryosphere, Himalayas, Alps, in the Andes mountain ranges in Latin America. So the cryosphere reflects this radiation back to the stratosphere, which is that phenomenon is called albedo. So we are decreasing the albedo of the Earth, the capacity to reflect back the radiation. So the heat from the sun is trapped in our atmosphere. And that's why put very simply, we call it radiative forcing. That's the technical terminology we use. So that heats up the atmosphere. And of course, if you see historically, the atmosphere, the global atmosphere, on an average, has become warmer by a little over 1 degree centigrade. In fact, once I was speaking in Thrissur on climate change and related issues in the Sahitya Academy. One person, the hall was very full that day. One person asked me, "Sir, what is the problem in a place like Kerala if 1 degree temperature rises by 1 degree centigrade?" I said, 1 degree is a global average. It can manifest as, like in Palakkad, it will manifest probably as 46 degrees centigrade or 47 degrees centigrade. There is an amplification process which happens locally. So this 1 degree increase which has happened so far is just a global average. It can manifest in much bigger numbers, especially in places like the Arctic, which is a very sensitive ecological zone of the Earth, which is Arctic and Antarctic very critical in regulating our climate. Climate, in fact, is a very complex phenomenon, which is regulated by the interaction of the Arctic, the Antarctic, the cryosphere, the oceans, the lithosphere, which is our land, the soil, and then the vegetation, which is the biosphere. So it's a very complex phenomenon. Even today, not understood fully, but last 30, 40 years, we have gained considerable knowledge of the climate, how it works. So it's a very complex thing, which we are chipping into. And this 1 degree rise, which has happened historically, is projected to now increase maybe between 1.5 and 2 degrees centigrade by 2030. This is based on a report by the International Panel for Climate Change, the UN deputed panel, which has brought out a report in 2018 October, which predicts that if we don't change our ways, change means drastically, cut emissions by 45% by 2030, then we are programmed to increase our average global temperature to 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade. And there is no sign of our reducing emissions up to 2030. As I said earlier, Emissions are on the rise, despite whatever is happening around the world, despite the Paris Agreement, which was supposed to bring down emissions. That's a voluntary agreement. There are no commitments or there are no targets given to countries, really. It's a voluntary thing. So emissions, according to me, and according to numerous independent climate scientists, are on the rise, and we are already set on the path of 2-degree increase. Because, when carbon dioxide or GHGs are released into the atmosphere, there is a lag time for the manifestation for it to manifest as climate change. In fact, there is a decadal lapse in the time from after emissions and after it started manifesting in climate change. So people like James Hansen, who was director of NASA's Goddard Institute of Space and Atmosphere, is now retired. James Hansen is a pioneer in climate studies. He made the first study in 1981 when hardly anybody was talking about climate, and he appeared before the United States Senate to make a presentation on how climate is changing. So James Hansen is still alive. He now works in Columbia University in New York. So according to him, the deal is done. We are on the path to 2-degree, maybe by 2030. And if we continue our ways, probably we are on path to increasing the global average temperature to 6 degrees by 2100. 6 degree means that is the extinction part. We won't survive that 6-degree global average increase because no life can survive in that kind of atmosphere. Maybe some drastic forms of life will survive under the ocean or something. I don't know. So there are amplifications. So when you talk of 1 or 2 degrees, it may sound like to the common man that, oh, what is there? Like the person who asked me in Trishur, what's the problem? Amplifications happen, especially these amplifications are very serious when it happens in the poles. There is a treaty banning, incursion into the Antarctic. So Antarctic is still fairly okay, but Antarctic ice is also melting. I can't go into all those details right now. But Arctic, we have entered Arctic in a very major way. There is rapid melting of snow and glaciers happening in the Arctic. The process is called Arctic amplification because if the snow and ice has to remain in their original form, you have to keep temperatures at the sub-zero levels. Ice can subsist only in 0 degree. So what has happened in the Arctic is in summer, that is in the Arctic, the summer means around September, the sea ice, in Arctic, I don't know whether you know about the difference between Arctic and Antarctic. Arctic, the central part of the Arctic, the North Pole, consists of sea, it was sea, the Arctic Sea, Arctic Ocean rather. There are many seas there, like the Beaufort Sea, there are many seas in the Arctic, but the Arctic Ocean, covering all these seas, it's a big water body. Whereas in the Antarctic, the central part of the southern pole is landmass. It's a big landmass surrounded by ocean. So in the Arctic, a lot of ice or snow forms on the sea, which has now started melting in summer, melting completely. In fact, in 2012, a German freighter ship traversed the Arctic Sea. And the commercial people are rejoicing this disappearance of the ice in the Arctic Sea because it cuts the distance between Pacific Ocean and Atlantic Ocean by half. I don't know if you know the geography of the world. The major transit route has been created through the Latin American country of Panama by cutting the land and connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. It's called the Panama Canal. It was created by United States way back when the new technologies were not available. And Panama Canal, like the Suez Canal in the Gulf, is a major route for oil transport. So the Panama Canal has cut the distance from, for oil to come from the Gulf to, say, the United States significantly. But if the Arctic Ocean opens up for, maritime transport, It will cut the distance again by half. You don't have to go through Panama. So a lot of people are rejoicing, but it's a huge danger for our climate because the ocean warms up. When the ocean warms, the ocean, there is incursion from the ocean into the surrounding ice areas. Like the biggest island in the world is Greenland. 80% of Greenland is a huge glacier, frozen ice. It's about 3 to 4 kilometers high, and I don't know, it's about more than 3,500 kilometers long and about 200 to 300 kilometers wide. So the Greenland ice sheet has started melting. In fact, the professor you spoke to, University of Calgary is doing a lot of work on cryospheric climate change. They have ships which travel to the Arctic. There are others also, a lot of others working on it. Like in the United States, there are many agencies working on it. I mentioned the University of Calgary because there was a Malayali Kerala origin scientist there. He's left there, and I think now he's in the University of Victoria. Vishnu Nandan, he is a cryosphere scientist, a Malayali from Trivandrum, who left his engineering, went to Europe and studied, earth sciences. Then he's a specialist in using laser and radar technologies in measuring ice depth and all. So he pioneered some of these things in the University of Calgary. So when I saw the name of professor who spoke yesterday, I thought you started this seminar in the right spirit. So the cryosphere is melting, and it's not ending there. The new study which has come up about Hindu Kush Himalayas, the entire Himalayas, in fact, as I said, the entire Himalayan cryosphere is more than 48,000 square kilometers. And it is supposed to disappear by the end of this century. It's already melting in a big way. There is a major study which has come out last year. In fact, this June, the Ministry of Earth Sciences, Government of India has published a study. It's very scary how the Himalayan glaciers are melting. It will displace millions of people, crores of people, maybe 50, 60 crore people in the northern Indian belt, which is fed by glacial rivers like the Ganga and Yamuna. I've been to the source of the Ganga, which is the Gomukh actually. You go beyond Gangotri, we have traveled right up to Gomukh. I went long back, even then the glacier was retreating a meter a year. Now the melt is pretty serious, and the Himalayan glaciers are supposed to disappear by the end of the century, which will be disastrous. It's not initially it will be flooding and displacement of a huge amount of people. Then it will be drought because the rivers dry up. So the situation is pretty serious, but there is no awareness. And add to all this, United States, even somebody like Mr. Obama, who was supposed to be very conscious of climate change issues, was forced to sanction mining, oil mining in the Arctic. And there is not just oil mining, there are mineral mining, metal mining happening in the Arctic. It has already started. They're all happy that the Arctic is melting. In fact, the latest development is the Greenland government, of course, Greenland is administered by Denmark, but the Greenland is a place with about 65,000 people only. But the Greenland government has sanctioned mining within Greenland. So everybody is happy by running after money, creating their own skies. But as a planet, we are going on the path of doom. This is where the climate situation stands. And if we continue on this path, and we have very little time. I started working in renewable energy in 2000. I thought we could transform the world by, bringing in green sources of energy. I'm no more very optimistic. India is doing a lot in renewable energy development. In fact, when I started working on this, I was lampooned by even my colleagues saying that you are mad. But now, of course, it is mainstream. I've gone through the ups and downs. My colleagues themselves thought I was mad when I left the IAS. But anyway, now it is mainstream. So I happen to be one of the people who worked in the initial years to mainstream this. So India is doing a lot in alternative energy. But globally, like people like Trump or anti-science, who doesn't understand what climate science is, they are a big problem. It's good that he's going, at least something will happen. But overall, we are not moving fast enough. As I said, we have to solve this climate problem. We have only 1 decade left. And I'm not seeing any signs. So I, who was kind of very optimistic type, I'm slowly becoming pessimistic about the future. I have to say that because that is what I am visualizing. In fact, I always like great poet, Malayalam poet, Akithan's lines, great poet who died recently. Velicham dukhamanunni tamasallo sukapradam. So when you acquire more and more knowledge, you tend to become pessimistic in certain aspects. But I still want to keep my optimism. Let me see whether I can hold on to it. So I just want to round up this thing about climate science. You know the Kerala floods 2018-19. This year we barely escaped big tragedy. We didn't get the large impact this year. As I said, Arctic mining is happening. Arctic sea ice is disappearing. Arctic and Antarctic land glaciers are melting. Mountain glaciers around the world are melting. In fact, people have now started removing mountain glaciers for mining. It's happening in many countries. In Chile, they are removing glaciers for mining gold and copper. You know, Chile produces 45% of the copper mined in the world. If you, I don't know whether you're aware of that. Then Kyrgyzstan, the country of Kyrgyzstan, is removing glaciers for allowing mining. Austria recently allowed removal of glaciers to establish a ski resort. So people have started removing glaciers for commercial activities. And Himalaya, I don't know, I don't have any information whether we are removing glaciers for commercial activities, but the global climate change is impacting Himalayas also. In fact, Himalayas and is even our Western Ghats, even though there is no ice, the ecologists call them the water towers, because our Western Ghats is our water tower because most of our rivers emanate from Western Ghats. Himalayas is the water tower of northern India and parts of central India because most of the glacial rivers originate from the Himalayas. So I would rather call this, there is no point in being apolitical and saying Anthropocene. Reams of paper have been written on the Anthropocene, but the depredation continues. So I would rather go with the terminology of Capitalocene. And one doesn't have to be a Marxist to think like that. I'll come to that later. I don't know, you must be aware since you are from Mathoma College, Tiruvalla, Pope Francis's latest encyclical, which is published on 1st of October. I received a copy from a friend in Kerala, mailed it to me. I will come to that. I'll read out from the Pope's latest encyclical released last month on the global situation today. You know, he had published an earlier encyclical in, I think, 2015, which is also on this environmental question. I'll return to that later. So what's happening around us in terms of climate change is going to change everything. In fact, since you are on the subject, I don't know, some of you may have read Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything. So that's a very appropriate title. This is going to change everything for us. All our constructions, all our creations will be destroyed by climate change. And I don't want to go into the impacts. It's going to be catastrophic. That's why I said for many years since 2000, I refused to speak on climate change. But now I'm forced to speak and write because how long do you remain silent? So the bourgeoisie certainties of the world is no more relevant. We're no more sure about linear progress. That's called, Mark Shapiro, the ecological writer, calls it the end of stationarity. The certainties are over. We have entered a phase where we are not certain about our future, how it's going to shape up. But very little is actually happening. Everybody pays lip service to climate and all, but everybody is after the society of the spectacle. You want spectacles every day to keep you, excited. Kerala is a typical example of a society of spectacle, of the spectacle eye. I have written about it. Guy Debord's classic book, which was published in 1967 in French, later translated into English, Society of the Spectacle. I have written about the book and compared Kerala to Society of Spectacle because the cultural world in Kerala, in a way, is dying out. You don't see writers anywhere in the open media, in the electronic media. Electronic media, which influences maximum maybe 80% of the people in Kerala, the visual media, including the social media platforms. It's a big pity that a lot of writers are also running after the celebrity, status on the social media. I stay away from all this purposefully because I think these are all evanescent phenomena which will disappear in the next 15, 20 years. So I stay away from them. But everybody is after the spectacle in Kerala. Nobody is worried about the future. When the floods come, we handle it. We handle the 2018 floods very beautifully. People were active. All that is good. But we are not thinking of the future. As a society, we have become, in regarding our future, we have become moribund. And that's not just in Kerala. I think in large parts of the world, society has become moribund, not thinking about the future. That is where it has become a cultural phenomenon. This fixation with, sky is the limit kind of thing. Everybody is very ambitious. You hear about the society, aspirational society. You hear it in India these days a lot. But what is this? Like after this corona pandemic has started, you're hearing on television, the economy is coming and sitting, and talking about increasing consumption to regenerate economic activity. What is this increasing consumption? Increasing consumption means, my next book is about these issues, the future of growth and how it's going to impact our future welfare. It's called The Last Days of Capitalist Growth. That is the book. It's about 400 pages. It's getting ready for publication, maybe before June. But the Shastra Sahitya Parishad wanted to publish it, so I'm giving it to them because I may write it in English. I've already started writing it in English. So it's very, it has become a cultural phenomenon. It's culturally fixated now. Even the person at the bottom of the economic rung in Kerala, everywhere for that matter. You look at it in northern states, even illiterate people in northern Indian states speak about development when they really mean it, economic growth, unending economic growth. They have come to believe that this is going to bring us happiness despite tremendous evidence that economic growth as it is practiced today, I'm not talking against all economic growth, but growth for profit as it is practiced today, the ultimate result has been concentration of wealth in the hands of 1% of people. That has been the ultimate result. And complete destruction of our habitats, our environment. So that is what growth has come to. But people, it is culturally ingrained in people that development and growth, that is the basis of politics everywhere. All politicians speak about growth and development without knowing what it is, what it entails. In fact, I don't want to get into all that. The amount of resource use is going to double in the next 30 years. And that is going to be disastrous. That's the other part, other than climate change, because 50% of climate change happens from resource extraction. These are all detailed subjects. If anybody who reads Malayalam, my book, the book has about 800 references, scientific studies from 21st century scientific studies. Any of you who read Malayalam, the book gives a very clear idea of all these scientific facts and how growth. In fact, there is a writer called Brian Check, whose book is called Fueling a Runaway Train. This phenomenon of growth today, which is going to exist for maybe, it's only as old as the fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are going to go away in the next, by 2050 or so, most of them will disappear. So this is a runaway train. We are fueling it, and the end of it, we will have a devastated planet. We will have impoverished population. We will have maybe billions of refugees around the world, climate refugees. That's the situation. So what literature can do is to attack this cultural part, this culturally ingrained belief in economic growth. As I said, it's not just in the rich, even in the poor. There may be marginal sections who are directly affected by environmental problems, who are fighting against it. But the larger, because Kerala today, I'm giving Kerala as an example because we are all based in the Kerala's habitat. Kerala is 50% urban today. And this 50% urban means you are disconnected from your habitat. You don't have any connection to the nature around you. So in such a society, it's very difficult to have a feeling for your habitat, for your environment. So that's also a global phenomenon because the urban population is growing. So we are disconnected from our habitats. So this culturally ingrained feeling of sky is the limit, you can tackle it probably through cultural activities. That is where literature comes in. That's why I've been speaking about eco-criticism or eco-fiction, eco-poetry, or, my first book was an ecology and short story. And I intended to write about 20 stories, mainly by people like O.V. Vijayan and C. Radhakrishnan and all. I ended up finding out more than 400 stories in Malayalam, which tackles the climate question. And my first book, in fact, while, sorry, I'm not boasting, my award numbers are actually around 9 now, the literary awards. Introduction to us at 6. So my first book only received 5 awards, including the Sahitya Academy Award. The book is out of print, about 5 editions had come out. I plan to launch a 20th year edition very soon because the book came out in 2000 and Corona time is not a time to publish such a book, which is about 450 pages. So next year, maybe I'll bring out a 20th year edition. So it was very well received. Probably it kickstarted a kind of ecological thinking in literature, literary criticism in Kerala. Many seminars held on the book. I don't want to go into it. You all who read Malayalam know about that. So literature, especially climate change, climate change is now getting expressed in literature. Initially, it was it's mostly science fiction novels were written on the subject. You can even go back to Jules Verne, who wrote science fiction novels. But coming to, say, 60s and 1960s onwards, writers like J.G. Ballard, his famous novel, there are many novels. I'm just mentioning one each. The Drought is J.G. Ballard's very famous novel. Arthur Herzog, the novel Heat. Kim Stanley Robinson, 40 Signs of Rain. So writers like this, there are many such writers who started writing science fiction, mostly dystopian. But my problem with the dystopian novels is that it's easy to write dystopian novels because even in the ecological front, there are a lot of neo-Malthusian writers like Paul Ehrlich and so many of them who predict the end of the world, the collapse, the sudden collapse, the disappearance. Well, it may well happen if you continue on this path, but I don't want to think of a world which is ending because I would like to end the perpetrators of this disaster rather than ending the world. So it's easy to talk about end of the world rather than, in a way it is masking the real problems. You're not saying that you want to end the world or the people who are, or the system which is creating the end of the world. So that's how I would look at it. So I would think that dystopian science fiction is not really, science fiction is anyway not considered by literary critics as mainstream fiction. So, but there are many ways in which realist novels can be written. Realist means I'm not speaking in the social realist sense of Esther years, but I have called it in some of my writings as ecological or eco-social realism. So it could be eco-social realism because you can tackle real life issues in fiction. I'll just give 3 examples of such. Little later, I will give 3 examples of such real life issues being handled in fiction. Realist novels addressing the climate question. And then, of course, you need not be limited to climate change or its impact per se. It can address issues of energy use. In fact, now there is a critical school developing, addressing questions of energy use in literature. And there are lots of novels. I plan to write my next book maybe on that, on energy and literature, which I plan to write in English also. It could be that, how the question of energy has reflected in literature. So it need not be just the impact of climate change on our lives, livelihood issues which have been created like migration, habitat destruction, poverty, people being displaced. There are so many livelihood issues which has been created by climate change. Beyond that, you can go in and look at systems of energy use. How historically we have made mistakes in using energy. And what forms of energy, other forms of energy were available? What were the alternatives? So you have to, you can have fiction, which you call realist, or some people call it speculative realism. Some people call it. So you call it by any name. There could be realist fiction based on environmental and climate issues. And that's where I myself have a good collection of such fiction. And in fact, even climate fiction, including science fiction, somebody has prepared a list of actually 200 such novels. Adam Trexler and one of his colleagues. Adam Trexler's famous book, I don't know, some of you may have seen, Anthropocene Fictions is one of the famous critical works he has published. So he and a colleague has, created a list of about 200 novels addressing this climate question, but many of them are actually science fiction novels. So I would only say why I'm saying science fiction transcends reality and becomes dystopian. I would rather say that we should address fiction. You should have in fiction, we should address historical issues. What kind of historical mistakes were made? What kind of systems, economic systems were created after the Enlightenment? I'm not refuting Enlightenment in totality. I think it's very regressive to refute Enlightenment in totality. There are some people who are doing it today. Anti-Enlightenment traditions growing around the world. We are seeing the rise of rightist forces around the world. People in Europe, you can see the phenomenon. Even Trump was the creation of that, the rise of the rightist forces. So that anti-Enlightenment approach, attitude, I'm not with that. But Enlightenment needs tweaking. That's what I would say. By maintaining the main precepts of Enlightenment, but changing its economic content. So the capitalist system which evolved after Enlightenment needs to be rethought. If we have to end this extinction threat. So I would just, and anyway, aesthetics has never been monolithic. It has always been a contested domain. Aesthetics, some people would say that you should only articulate individual experiences, individual experiences are what is most important, or your experience of your mind. But that's very contested terrain. And in fact, after the fall of social realism, as it existed in the Soviet era, the whole literary thinking went into a textual mode, which has, of course, now disappeared. Actually, realism is back in literary criticism now. So, since aesthetics is a contested domain, contested terrain, you can have your own articulations. As I said, I have called it eco-social realism. Somebody else could call it speculative realism. In fact, it's not speculative to my mind because it's upon us. It's happening. It's not anything in the future. It's already happening, and things are happening in a very big way. In India, especially, 2013, the Uttarakhand disaster, in which about 13,000 people perished. Beginning then, India is also seeing the impacts of climate change. Kerala saw a most disastrous manifestation in 2018. I don't want to make any predictions, but probably we are in for repetitive, because one of the reasons why it is happening in Kerala, I've spoken about in some functions in Kerala. because Arabian Sea, which is not traditionally cyclonic, has now become cyclonic. Because of climate change, Arabian Sea is like a kind of bay area between the Arabian Gulf and the Indian subcontinent. So that bay area has kind of the sea surface temperature has increased a lot. There are a lot of scientific studies which after the 2017 Oki cyclone which affected Kerala also. Oki, of course, came from Bay of Bengal. After that, I did research into what's happening in the Arabian Sea. I found a lot of studies from 2014 onwards, which has established that the sea surface temperature in the Arabian Sea has gone up significantly, and we are in for repeated cyclonic occurrences after 2014. But fortunately for Keralites and the western part of India, most of the cyclones which are originating in the Arabian Sea, the landfall is in places like Salalah in the Persian Gulf. That I think Salalah is in Oman. So, but the net effect we are getting is extreme precipitation. That is our technical terminology, or extreme rains. That's going to be extreme short bursts of rain. That's what Kerala is experiencing now. And the whole western part of India is threatened with this extreme precipitation, if not future landfalls of cyclones which originate in the Arabian Sea. So we are, there is no safe place anymore that way. So we are in for such dangers. So we have to come out with these realities, which is in front of us. It's no more speculative. It's not about the future. It's in front of us. I would just mention 3 novels which have handled these issues in some way. One is Flight Behavior by Barbara Kingslauer. That tackles the destruction of biodiversity through climate change. It's about the migration patterns of monarch butterfly, who used to come to the Appalachian Mountains in the United States. Appalachian region in the United States is a region where maximum coal has been mined, and there has been tremendous environmental destruction in that region. Coal mining, maximum mining happened in the Appalachian Mountains. There's in fact mountaintop removal, great mountaintop removals have happened. So Kingslauer talks about biodiversity loss and how it has affected the monarch butterflies' migration patterns. Then there is, not in a big way, but Hungry Tide by Amitav Ghosh. Some people have written about it, written climate criticism based on Amitav Ghosh's Hungry Tide. This talks about, Sundarbans, basically, an island called Mori Chapi. I hope that's the correct Bengali pronunciation, Mori Chapi, where, the Bangladeshi migrants live, and their interaction with the island flora and fauna. And toward the end of the novel, there is a very disastrous cyclone, gigantic storm surge into the Sundarbans, which sort of denotes or connotes the advent of climate change and probable submergence of some Sundarbans in the future. Sundarbans is a set of thousands of islands on the side of West Bengal. So Hungry Tide, that shows another aspect of real life aspect. Then Solar by Anne McEwan, who talks about the mitigation part, about renewable energy, the need for deployment of renewable energy, about solar energy, the need for that. So these are 3 novels which I briefly mentioned. There are many more realist novels addressing the climate question, but these 3 I just wanted to briefly mention how it's possible to write realist novels. I think we have already taken about 50 minutes. I would try to end in another 10-15 minutes. The problem when you come to fiction writing in this mode is that these are climate itself or energy or environment itself is highly interdisciplinary. I have always thought that after more than 20-25 years of writing about eco-criticism, why Malayalam critics have not taken to it in a big way. Some of them have. In my book, edited book, Haritha Niroopanam Malalathil, I have tried to gather, eco critical writings by many Malayalam writers, but it has not become a major movement in Malayalam because I think the problem is its interdisciplinary nature. Because most of the critics come from humanities background, not just critics. Most of the writers come from humanities background. There are some exceptions. So they find it very difficult to move out of the comfort zone and study the science or go into other disciplines. I found this. I was chairman of the Board of Environmental Studies in the Malayalam University, in Kerala for I think for 4.5 years. I remained as chairman. Then I resigned because I didn't like certain things happening there. But we started the MA in Environmental Studies course in Malayalam University. We were instrumental, our board was instrumental in preparing the syllabus. But then I find when we recruited some faculty there who studied environmental science, who had PhD in environmental science, they were refusing to move out of their comfort zone. In fact, they started engineering to change the syllabus back to environmental science. Because environmental studies is a very broad subject, which covers history, which covers philosophy, which covers literature, you name it. So we had framed the syllabus accordingly. But the people who had done PhD, we didn't get people with environmental studies background and faculty, but the people who were recruited were finding it very uncomfortable to move out of their comfort zone and started engineering within the university to turn the syllabus back, to water down the syllabus into environmental science. That's the time when I quit the board. Anyway, it's not meant as an indictment of anybody, but I just wanted to mention it because so many writers find it difficult to move out of individual experiences, individual, what you call spiritual visions. Of course, some writers can write these things if they have the insight, what you call Atma Jnanam in Malayalam. If you have inherent epiphanies, serendipities, you can write. You don't need to do a lot of scientific studies. Writers can write. People like Aymanam John, Ambigasudan Mangad. So such writers are doing it. In fact, Aymanam John, who is very close to you in Kottayam, I've come to his house a couple of times, good friend. Aymanam John is a writer whose serendipities and epiphanies are very strong on this question of environment. He's not written much on climate, but I'm saying the environmental question. So it can be perceived by a writer if you have that kind of insight, inherent insight through imagination. But it's not possible for a critic to always do that. You have to study. You have to do interdisciplinary study. And that is one block, I think, where Western writers are doing much better. And India, ecocriticism is not moving much forward because the inability of many people with background in humanities to cross their comfort zones and do interdisciplinary study for facilitating, ecocriticism. But the thing is, no, some writers have this inability. In fact, some writers have called a cognitive problem because most people in the population have a problem in their worldview is conditioned by what you call the size of the frame of their window. What you call frame analysis. I have written about frame analysis earlier. So the size of the window through which you see the world determines your vision. So that's a problem with most humans, and humans have such a cognitive problem. So I'm not blaming a lot of people also. But then if ecocriticism has to grow, the critic has to acquire interdisciplinary knowledge, move out of their comfort zones. And Western writers, many of them are doing it, even though I was there in 95 in the University of Colorado, Boulder, in the first ecocriticism conference, but I find ecocriticism has tended to move around certain limited concepts. It's still not moving out of certain comfort zones, which I think now ecocriticism needs to do. And that is why climate criticism offers a lot of possibilities. Climate fiction and ecocriticism related to climate fiction offers such a lot of new possibilities. I'm right now engaged in, I don't want to go into them, but I'm just mentioning to you, studying the cryosphere and the southern pole, the northern pole, and the cryosphere, the oceans, because the oceans, something else is also happening in the oceans. We have started trying to mine. There are large deposits of methane on the seabed. Seabed means you're talking of 7 kilometers below the surface of the sea. We are planning to mine the methane present there, which is, of course, on geological time, this methane was deposited down to maintain the carbon balance in our atmosphere. Now we are going to mine that also and bring it out and pollute the earth again. So it's very, very deadly. What's happening is not just about mining in the poles, not just about mining in the mountain glaciers. You're going to destroy the oceans through ocean bed mining. This is the areas I am actually studying in depth now to write the final chapter of my book, which I was mentioning. So this is where ecocriticism offers, to me, exciting possibilities of addressing the cultural roots of this problem. And I think more than science, if you can impact culturally, I'm not saying because I or somebody else wrote Ecocriticism, Kerala has changed in any big way. But at least we must have impacted maybe 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 thinking people in Kerala. The mainstream may be out of it because anyway, most people don't read. 10% or 10%, I don't know. Most people are hooked onto the TV. And before TV came, most people were hooked onto the Ma Variga from Kottayam. So I'm not blaming. And anyway, most people are worried about their daily existence. But at least the intellectual class should now rise up to this challenge in literature and literary criticism. Now, I want to come to the criticism part. One major work which has come out in the recent past, in 2016, was the book The Great Derangement by Amitabh Ghosh. As soon as the book came out, I had written about a detailed essay, beginning with the book, and then about climate and literature, which was again published as a long essay published in Malayalam Weekly, and it's there in my book published by Kairali Books, Theranjadatha Lekhanangal, which was published in 2018 by Kairali Books. So that's the time when I started looking at climate and literature. That is what, 2016-17, after in fact triggered by Amitabh Ghosh's book, The Great Derangement. I think some of you must have read that book. But Ghosh points to a tendency of novelists to mine their own experience. That's how he calls it, mining their own experience. And if you look at Malayalam fiction also, despite some writers like Sarah Joseph or Eminem John or Ambika Sudan Mangad, there are many others, I'm not naming all of them. Most novelists are focusing on individual experiences. They find it difficult to move out of their individual experience barrier. So writers have to move out of the comfort zone and stop mining their own experience. Because Kerala, that way, if your historical experience is limited. We are a state which has never been exposed to major historical events. No big wars, no big, disruptions in life. Except even colonial disruption was marginal in Kerala. It was not major. It has disrupted our environment in a big way, but the societal disruption was not as big as in many other parts, say in Latin America. The colonial disruption resulted in, killing lakhs of the indigenous people in Latin America. In Kerala, those things don't happen. Disrupted our environment in a big way, destroyed our forests because they went in for commercial farming and all that. But so Kerala, if you don't move out of your comfort zone, the sphere of experience to writers becomes limited. So you have to take up that challenge and address these issues. So, as I said, Amitabh Ghosh's book, if those of you have not read, I would recommend that you please read it. The Great Derangement. In fact, his new book has been announced. It's coming out next year. In fact, his novel is probably already out. I'm not able to trace it. It's called The Jungle Nama. It's a kind of lyrical story, again based on Sundarban's experience. the Jungle Nama. Next book is expected next year. It's based on the pandemic and climate and all that. So I would recommend Amitav Ghosh is the writer. We should all be following in many of these issues. So eco-criticism, when you talk about, we should move out of the conventional definition. I just want to read out the conventional definition by Cheryl Lofelty. I met her in '95 when I went to Colorado. Her book, Ecocriticism Reader, which many of you must be using as the basic reference work. All ecological criticism shares the fundamental premise that human culture is connected to the physical world, affecting it and affected by it. Ecocriticism takes as its subject the interconnections between nature and culture, specifically the cultural artifacts of language and literature. As a critical stance, it is one foot in literature and the other on land. As a theoretical discourse, it negotiates between the human and non-human. This is a rather constraining definition of eco-criticism. So I would say that you redefine eco-criticism in an eco-social realist way from our experience of the past quarter century after eco-criticism was launched in 1995. And when our existence is being destroyed beyond imagination, you cannot sit back and talk about, relationship to land. Nature is being extinguished. So what is the point in talking about relationship to nature? You have to have resistance to the forces who are extinguishing nature. Eco-criticism, some concepts have been thrown up, like, for example, risk criticism, precarity. In fact, I don't want to name him, there is an Indian critic who doesn't live, he's a Malayali, but doesn't live in Kerala, writes in English. He has come up with this concept of precarity. It's not just him. He has written a book on precarity. But then if you talk about precarity without addressing the basic causes of why or what has made us precarious, then it's a dangerous stand. Risk criticism. It should not be done to mask the realities. You create, again, it becomes dystopian then. And dystopianism, as I said, dystopian way of addressing literature is a way of masking the real issue. So I think it should be the forces of resistance. Eco-criticism should address resistance, cultural resistance to what is happening around us. And that should be, because critics' responsibility is not just to study existing literature. Critics' responsibility is also to create. I'm not saying critic is the God, but critic also creates literature, new avenues for writers. Kesari in Malayalam, Kesari Balashnavala did that. The whole social realism movement, in a way, was triggered by Kesari's writings. So critic has that role in creating new avenues, new visions for writers. So I think writing has always been a form of resistance, because writers are people who are basically timid people. Even critics are timid. I write because I am unable to go out onto the street and fight. I'm not programmed to fight on the streets. So writing is my way of resistance. Any writing is resistance for that matter. So eco-criticism should form a way of cultural resistance to these depredations which are happening around us and which are leading us to sort of extinction maybe by the end of this century. The days of textual criticism and apolitical aesthetics, it's over. They are over. You can no more, live in that comfort of textual decoding, or you remain apolitical, saying that I'm neutral. Writer doesn't. Then you don't need a writers. There's so many people in the world who are neutral. Writers have to speak the truth. And you don't have to be a Marxist to do this. That's why I mentioned Pope's latest encyclical. I just want to read out, I will end in 5 minutes, another 5 minutes. I think I've taken enough time. I'll read out 3 quotations from Pope Francis's encyclical. He's not directly using words like capitalism and all, because he is the Pope after all. He's the head of the Catholic Church. But he indirectly attacks capitalism. The fundamental principle of capitalism is that individual enterprise, left free, it will result in larger social benefit. So he talks about individualism. It is, I think, para number 105 in the encyclical. Individualism does not make us more free, more equal, more fraternal. The mere sum of individual interests is not capable of generating a better world for the whole human family. Nor can it save us from the many ills that are now increasingly globalized. Radical individualism is a virus that is extremely difficult to eliminate, for it is clever. It makes us believe that everything consists in giving free rein to our own ambitions. That's why I kept referring to sky is the limit, aspirations. As if by pursuing ever greater ambitions and creating safety nets, we could somehow be serving the common good. The second quotation I want to say, to read out from his encyclical is 122, para number 122. He says, development must not aim at amassing a wealth by a few, but must ensure human rights, personal and social, economic and political. That's very significant, political, including the rights of nations and of peoples. The right of some to free enterprise, that's capitalism, or market freedom, cannot supersede the rights of peoples and the dignity of the poor. For that matter, the respect for the natural environment. For if we make something our own, it's only to administer it for the good of all. We have somebody who said this in India. We have forgotten him, Mahatma Gandhi. Oh, it is time to reread the Mahatma's writings in a big way. I'm doing it right now, even though most of my reading is in Marxist theory. Right now, I'm reading the Mahatma because he has become very relevant for the current. In fact, I'm looking for ways for some meeting between him and Marxist theory. Well, that's beside the point now. So the third para I want to read out from Pope's encyclical, para 168. The marketplace by itself cannot resolve every problem. However much we are asked to believe this dogma of neoliberal faith. He used the word neoliberalism. Whatever the challenge, this impoverished and repetitive school of thought, that is neoliberalism, always offers the same recipes. Neoliberalism simply reproduces itself by resorting to the magic theories of spillover or trickle, that is a trickle-down hypothesis, that you create wealth, it will trickle down to the poor. The Pope is refuting that. Spillover or trickle without using the name as the only solution to societal problems. There is little appreciation of the fact the alleged spillover does not resolve the inequality that gives rise to new forms of violence threatening the fabric of society. It's imperative to have a productive, this sentence is extremely critical. Pope says, it's imperative to have a productive economic policy directed at promoting an economy that favors a productive diversity and business creativity and makes it possible for jobs to be created and not out. Not throwing out jobs. In fact, the digital revolution, I've written about this also for my essay. I got a big literary prize by a group in Kerala. How digitalization is stealing jobs. And the next 10 years, with the corona pandemic, in fact, the digitalization has increased. It's going to amplify, it's going to grow. And a lot of people, crores of people will be thrown out of jobs in the next decade. And they call it, they have a beautiful name, the fourth industrial revolution, for throwing people out of jobs. That's where ultimately the digital automation or the artificial intelligence is leading us. We're already living in a world controlled by algorithms, because a lot of the work, like the questions you get when you log on to a site, the questions which are coming back are not sent by people. They're sent by algorithms. So algorithms will replace humans. So the digital world is going to take over our jobs. So Pope has addressed the issues please read it. If you have not, I'm sure you must have received it. But if anybody not received it, Dr. Remy can request me. I'll mail it to you for reading. So this is the situation we are in. So ecocriticism has to be political. There is no way of flight from reality. You cannot fly from reality anymore. If you don't build up cultural resistance to this corporate depredation, they will lead us to extinction. And in fact, there is a lot is being written about now on extinction. You know, the Noam Chomsky's latest book is on actually internationalism and extinction, actually. So, and there are a lot of theory books now coming out on this extinction capitalism. A lot of such books are now coming out. So it's become very relevant to articulate this in fiction, in ecocriticism, and go beyond this dystopian situation. So I would end with a quotation from Amitabh Ghosh, that instead of articulating dystopian visions, he says to imagine other forms of existence is exactly the challenge posed by the climate crisis. The refusal to do so would amount to a formula for collective suicide. Thank you very much.
Dear participants, the floor is open for discussion. If you have any questions, you can ask. I have a few questions that I received from the participants. Shall I give you the questions, sir?
Yes.
Okay. So, Ms. Mary Roshni is asking a question. Could you please mention some philosophical schools of ecocriticism?
No, actually, ecocriticism doesn't have any philosophical school, but eco-philosophy has. Because the philosophical basis of ecocriticism is eco-philosophy. I've seen that many scholars in Kerala and elsewhere have taken to deep ecology. But I am not an advocate of deep ecology because I find it, it's not fascist, but it is very regressive. So I find it very regressive. There is what the philosophical basis I follow is what I call eco-socialism or eco-Marxism. So, and there is a tremendous wealth of literature on interpreting Marxism the green way. I have a collection of books, maybe more than 100 books on the subject. I plan to write a book in Malayalam maybe next year or so on this eco-Marxism. So deep ecology is one big strand of eco-philosophy. There is social ecology. There is ecofeminism, which ecofeminism again is not on monolithic philosophical system. It has at one extreme a deep ecological vision. At other extreme you have eco-Marxism. I mean Marxist ecofeminism. So I have written about all this. Please, I would request that if you read Malayalam, my collected works issued by Kairali Books in 2018, Thiranjedutha Lekhanangal. I think it's still available. I hope it's available. It has all these philosophical evocations of, how I am looking at this way. So there is, as I said, deep ecology, social ecology, ecofeminism and its various manifestations, right up to Marxist ecofeminism, and then eco-socialism. So eco-critical philosophy as such, the Western eco-criticism hovers around mostly deep ecology and the Thoreauvian vision. But I would think it's a very limited vision. Okay, next question.
Yes, sir. There is a comment from a participant. You said Anthropocene is an apolitical term, but the very fact that no political action is being taken regarding climate change points to the fact that it is a dangerous reality that is being purposefully ignored. And she also adds, Capitalocene, the term itself is political. One cannot separate politics and capitalism.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So what is your point? That you agree with the term Capitalocene or you don't?
Yeah, but this is a comment made by a participant.
Yeah, okay. No, I would go with the terminology Capitalocene because I'm not saying the scientists who propose Anthropocene. In fact, Anthropocene terminology has been accepted by eco-Marxist writers like John Bellamy Foster. So it's a very gray area. And I would not quarrel with the term because it has been accepted by some of the Marxist writers like John Bellamy Foster. But I think it's more appropriate to call it capitalistic. But this is semantics. Let's not get into semantics. I said any name is fine so long as you are doing the right things.
All right, sir. There is another question from Mr. Padmanabh Trivedi. Sir, how do you look at the agrarian crisis in India in relation to the ecological crisis?
Well, good question. In fact, the book you mentioned while introducing me, Challenges of Agriculture in the 21st Century, which I published in 1999. At that time, there was tremendous resistance from even my vice chancellors. I was commissioner in the agriculture department at that time. Even the vice chancellors resisted the publication of the book, saying that, ecological agriculture is impractical. But today, the whole world has turned around. Kerala has a policy of ecological agriculture, organic agriculture, you name whichever way. The way forward is only ecological agriculture. And why are the farmer suicides happening? What is the basic problem of farmer suicide in our agriculture? It's a simple equation of the cost of inputs and the cost of outputs. The cost of inputs, that is fertilizers and pesticides, have gone up so much that the farmer is not able to earn enough to repay this cost. He takes debts, the crop fails or the crop doesn't succeed, he has to repay the debt. So this is a simple fact. But conventional farming, I'm not saying conventional farming should be propagated, but reinvention of organic farming or agroforestry, there are various names, agroecological farming. Reinvention of that is necessary because what is conventional farming? What is modern farming? The industrial farming. It's based on fertilizers and pesticides, and it is made from oil, oil and natural gas. Fertilizers are made from fossil fuels. Pesticides are also made from fossil fuels, and fossil fuels will be gone in the next 20, 30 years. You won't be able to create fertilizers and pesticides. So moving into ecological agriculture is a necessity, and it will save the farmer from debt. And secondly, the question is whether you can feed the world through ecological agriculture. It has been proven by FAO, none other than FAO, and many people around the world that ecological farming can really sustain the world. You can produce enough. I don't know. Hello? You lost me?
Yes. No, you're audible.
In fact, my friend Ayman John recently used a term in one of his stories called Anachena. Anachena, I don't know what do you call Chena? What do you call in English? I'm not sure. So I asked him, where did you get this term? Because I heard it in my childhood in my village. We used to produce anachenas through organic farming, huge. So that was organic farming. My grandfather was a farmer. We did organic farming. Our coconut trees used to give the best harvest. One tree has even up to 300, coconuts. Today you see my farms. I still have farms. My mother is still there. Our coconuts are extremely bad. So it's a fallacy that if you don't have chemical agriculture, you cannot produce enough. Okay, next, please.
So, next question. A participant asks, you are a writer. Do you think your fictional works are more effective in bringing about change, at least in the way people think, on a larger scale among the population than political or governmental policies?
No, I'm not a fiction writer, by the way. Whoever asked the question, I'm a critic. But okay, we can say ecological fiction, does it really change people? No, I would put it this way. There's a saying that, writing really doesn't change anything in the world, but that's a fallacy. Writing influences people at the spiritual in a secular term, because I myself am not a big believer in God, so forgive me for that. I lost my faith in God when I was 17 years old. So spiritual I'm using because even though I'm not a non-believer, I do things like yoga. I'm a practitioner of yoga. So I have a certain spiritual element in me. So in a spiritual way, it influences people and people's thinking. And I think societal changes happen not through diktats of government only. Of course, government can change society in a big way through laws, through diktats, but it also changes through people's pressure. And if 15% of the people, the critical mass is about 15%, people start thinking differently, there will be changes in society. That's why in the 80s, our Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was instrumental in bringing about a major basis for environmental laws in India. I mean, she saved Silent Valley in Kerala. So people's pressure, knowledge around us really changes people's way of thinking. That's how writing affects people. It's not direct impact. You ask me, show me how Ambika Sudan Mangad's novel Enmagaje has affected the pesticide problem in Kasaragod district. I have no answer. But then it has its relevance. That's how I look at it. Hello? Hello?
Hello, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah. Okay. I'm not seeing you on the screen, that's all. I can hear you.
Okay. Susan Thomas is asking, how do you think climate change could compound the disparities across race, class, and gender further?
Oh, very intelligent question. Actually, in fact, any environmental destruction would first affect the marginalized population. Because marginalized, I include the poor, the slum dwellers, women, children, everybody. So climate change will only increase disparities because you look at when floods happen due to cyclonic rains or extreme rains, who are the worst affected first? People who live in low-lying areas, isn't it? And who are the people living in low-lying areas? Those are people who could not afford land in the main areas, the safe areas. So that's one part. Second part, if drought happens and water scarcity happens because of climate change, the women, the conventionally fixed roles of women. I'm not saying women should be doing that. I'm not an author that women should be doing all those functions which are sort of assigned to them culturally now. But things as they are today, women fetch water in our villages. Not in Kerala. I'm not talking of Kerala. Everybody has a tap probably or a well. But in northern India, you come to the northern part of India, women fetch water for there. In fact, in many villages in northern India, I have worked in interior areas in Maharashtra for 9 years. So I know how the villages are in northern India. So even the Dalits and all, they don't have a well. Their well is far away from the village. They have separate wells. That's how they are treated. So the marginalized populations, including women, children, the poor, etc., would be the worst affected by climate change. Because the rich people can sell their assets, move away to safer places. The poor cannot do that.
Okay. So there is one more question from Susan Thomas. She asks, most sci-fi works are dystopian and conjure up a terrible future for the world. Are there any utopian works which envision a timely, positive response to climate change and a better world in the future?
No, I have not come across utopian climate works as such, but there are utopian environmental novels like James Howard Kunstler or even William Morris going back to 19th century, Things Made by Hand by James Howard Kunstler. Or William Morris's News from Norway. There are many such utopian novels in the environmental fiction genre, but climate as such, I have not, because when you know the reality of climate change, you cannot write utopian fiction. It's impossible. So climate, but environmental issues, but if you think of resisting this, defeating the forces which are leading to us, that is possible. But as it stands today, the way things are moving, dystopians have an upper hand, unfortunately. So I have not come across a utopian climate novel, but I don't have the names in front of me. I mentioned a couple of them, but all of them I don't have the names, but I have written in my works about some of the utopian environmental fiction. That is a way how it can change.
Sir, a participant asks, sir, you said fiction should deal with historical events. with issues of enlightenment, what he called eco-social realism. But aren't science fiction novels on climate change also powerful, like The Drowned World by J.G. Ballard?
Yeah. Well, yes, but the problem is science fiction has a problem. Some of it materializes as reality in future, but conceptually they may be correct at certain levels, but they may not always be right, because what happens in the next 30 years is not really very predictable, how things change. So that's my problem with science fiction. And a lot of the science fiction, in fact, one section of science fiction visualizes a very utopian world, a world manned by space travel, the Star Wars kind of situation where you're traveling across space, which are all fallacies. Interstellar travel, it's all nonsense. You are not going to colonize any other star. This is our only home. So such fiction is utopian in the sense you can colonize the space, you can go and live elsewhere. It's all fallacies. Such utopian fiction is available. But I'm talking about the dystopian science fiction. What purpose does dystopia serve in fiction? That's my question. If the reader feels that nothing is going to change, his tendency, the standard human tendency is to say, okay, things are not going to change, it's only going to get worse. So Malayalam nammal parayalla adichu polikkan, let's the rest of the time adichu polikkan. That feeling can come. That's the danger. So you should work for change. That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm against dystopia.
Okay. Sir, Mr. Padmanabh Trivedi has added on to his question on agrarian crisis. He asks, is there adequate representation of agrarian crisis in literature in India?
In literature, well, I have a collection of Indian eco-novels, maybe about 30 of them, published in English, because I can't read in, even though I am fluent in Marathi and Hindi, literary works I can't read in Hindi or Marathi. So whatever has been translated to English, I have, but I have not really scanned them. So I cannot today say where in Indian fiction, the agro situation, the agricultural crisis is reflected. Today, I'm not able to say. I've been collecting such eco-novels, Indian eco-novels, especially after I chaired a session in the Central Sahitya Academy in Delhi on 29th of February this year. I chaired a session on ecocriticism and Indian fiction. After that, I have accelerated my collection of Indian fiction in English, translated fiction mostly, not written in English as such. But I have not gone through them, so I am not able to tell you immediately whether such an aggravation is articulated in Indian fiction.
Okay. Sir, Mr. Danish Durai asks, is non-fiction possible for critical reading under climate change?
No. The question was non-fiction possible for critical reading?
Yes, under climate change. That's the question.
Are you talking of eco-critical works relating to climate, or are you talking of non-fiction? Non-fiction, there is you can fill a bookshelf, a whole library with works on climate change. There's so many. If you're interested in reading at least a couple of books which are very critical and new, there is a book called Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace. David Wallace, published last year, extremely good book. David Wallace, Uninhabitable Earth. Then there is a very sensitive book by the world's living topmost climate scientist in the world. I mentioned him, James Hansen. His book is called Storms of My Grandchildren. There's so many books. You just have to log on to Google and search for non-fiction related to climate. There are so many. And even Amitabh Ghosh's Great Derangement, which relates climate to literature and all. And if you're talking of eco-critical works, I mentioned one. There are so many. I cannot reveal all my cards in this lecture. I'm sorry. But Adam Trexler's Anthropocene Fictions is one such work I would mention here. So there is a library full of books available. non-fiction or even ecocriticism, at least there are a handful. You can at least have a dozen works on ecocriticism relating to fiction. I mentioned one. You can trace the others. Okay.
So there's another question. Is climate change a blind spot for Malayalis and Malayalam writers? Of course, there is Sarah Joseph's Gift in Green or Adi in Malayalam.
Yeah. Well, not exactly. Some writers have tried to. There is a famous story by, I've written about that story in my book, Bhavaneda Jalastaligal. Niralian is a story by Ambika Sudan Mangad. It's about, you heard about Vanneri Kadapuram in Kerala, in northern Kerala. Vanneri is a place where sea turtles used to come to breed, to lay eggs. So this story is based on the sea turtles' arrival in Vanneri, and they lay eggs. 1 year they don't hatch. So there is a researcher, a youngster there who lives there, and he finds out that the eggs are not hatching because the temperature in the sea sand there has gone up by about 3 degrees for turtle eggs to hatch. So he has related this and the life of some fisher folk there in an interesting way. That's the only work I can point out in Malayalam which has addressed this climate question in a serious way, Nirali. But I think tremendous potential for Malayalam writers to address this question, especially after the 2018 floods. But as I said, the awareness is that this kind of, some kind of transient, evanescent phenomenon, it will go away. The realization that it's going to stay with us for centuries, that is not gone down. Not just in Kerala, anywhere in the world, the realization in the mainstream that this climate change is going to stay with us for centuries, so it's not gone.
Sir, can I ask a question? Sir, you have worked with the Department of Economic Affairs with the Government of India. Yes. I would like to know, economics is usually a field that is more concerned with the selling price, and it looks at ecology as mostly a commodity. So, could there be an ecologically informed economics for us?
Absolutely, absolutely. It has already developed. Right from the 1980s, environmental economics has been a developing field. The pioneer is Herman Daly. If you are interested, you can read his book, Steady State Economics, Herman Daly. There are a lot of developments in environmental economics. Of course, there are, again, multiple schools there. And there are, even in Marxist economics, ecological aspects have been brought in by Paul Burkett. Paul Burkett, the writer, you can look at his books on the net. Paul Burkett has articulated ecological economics in a Marxist way. And the latest development in economics is Herman Daly's own writer you should read. I mentioned one of his books, Steady State Economics. Why go to foreigners? You can read Kumarappa, J.C. Kumarappa's works. Kumarappa was a follower of Mahatma Gandhi. He was a member in the first Planning Commission of India. Kumarappa's works are collected and available in Kerala easily. You can go to bookshop and pick up. It's village level economics kind of work he's written. There are 3-4 books, but they're all collected into one book, I think a couple of years back. Then the latest development in economics is called biophysical economics. In fact, my new book brings together a lot of such biophysical studies done in 21st century. Biophysical means you're looking at economics from the material aspects, like what are the resources you use for economic growth. After all economics is a kind of, economic system is a subsystem of the ecological system. You are doing economics by mining things from the earth only. Nothing is coming from outside except sunlight, sun's energy. Nothing comes from outside. You're mining resources from the earth, whether it is fossil fuels, whether it is metals, whether it is, the mobile you are holding and the digital equipments we are using, they contain about 80 elements called rare earths. They're all mined from the earth. So now there's a branch of economics called biophysical economics, which is developed in Charles A.S. Hall is a pioneer in biophysical economics. his latest book, the revised edition, last year, his book has been on biophysical economics. A revised version has come out. Charles says all. You can look into the net. Very interesting reading. They don't burden you with equations and theories too much. So biophysical economics is a further development of ecological economics, and even there is a Marxist version by writers like Paul Burkett.
Thank you, sir. I guess we have come to the end of the questions. I guess there are no more questions, sir.
Okay.
So, shall I invite Professor Anne-Marie Raju for the vote of thanks?
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We have come to the end of the second lecture in the International Lecture Series, Effacing a Culture of Extinction, Exploration of Green Philosophies and Representations. It gives me immense pleasure in proposing the vote of thanks for what has been a very fascinating and engaging session. On behalf of the Postgraduate and Research Department of English, Mahatma College, Tiruvalla, let me express my deep sense of gratitude to G. Madhusudanan, Founder Director General, Institute of Sustainable Energy, Pune, for his informative session on climate issues and eco-criticism. He has given up his flourishing career as an IAS officer and has devoted his career for pioneering sustainable energy development in India. We are really fortunate to have such an eminent personality with us today to speak on such a relevant issue. Sir, thank you for making us aware of the global situation today and for making us aware of the drastic impact climate change can bring about. Sir has spoken very clearly and has evinced the cognizance of the speaker in the field of eco-criticism. He has talked about the role that writers and critics can play in bringing about awareness about ecological concerns, the need for critics to redefine eco-criticism in a social realistic manner, and the need to address cultural resistance. Critics need to acquire interdisciplinary knowledge and move out of the comfort zone. By citing real-life examples, quoting authors, he has made this talk very insightful and interesting. So we look forward to your upcoming book, The Last Days of Capitalistic Growth, and your book on climate change and literature. Once again, I thank you for your informative session and for patiently addressing the queries. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
I take this opportunity to thank our Head of the Department, Dr. Ashley Susan Phillip, for her guidance and support throughout. Thank you, ma'am. In his absence, let me express a heartfelt gratitude to our beloved principal, Dr. Varghese Matthew, for his support and guidance throughout. My sincere thanks to Dr. Remy Cherian George for her welcome address. Let me also thank Professor Rahul N. for introducing the speaker and for moderating the discussion. An event like this cannot happen overnight. It requires rigorous planning and effort. A special word of thanks to the conveners of the session, Professor Susmitha Ann Varghese and Dr. Remy Cherian George, who have strived hard to make the lecture a success. Sincere thanks to Professor Rahul N., Dr. Renjit Joseph, and Professor Tina T. Elizabeth for managing the technical side of the lecture on Zoom and YouTube. Thank you, dear teachers. My deep sense of appreciation and thanks to all the participants who chose to be live with us today and attended the lecture and discussion with great enthusiasm. Thank you. The lecture is without the joint effort of the teachers of the department. My sincere gratitude to all my colleagues. Let me also thank our dear students for the melodious song. Once again, I thank you all for being with us this afternoon. The third session in the lecture series, Renewal of Our Mind Towards a Green Deal by Dr. D. Bennett, Vice Principal and Associate Professor in English, National College, Trichy, will be on the 1st of December. Hoping you will join us for the upcoming lectures too. Thank you. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you all. All the best to you.